Wednesday evening, everyone. You are watching Direct Line Live. It is March 13th, 2024. Almost Pi Day, everyone, and only a few more days to get your Shamrock Shake. Our special guest tonight is Becky Norton Dunlop, Senior Reagan Administration official and Cabinet Secretary for DNR in the great state of Virginia for the great Governor George Allen. Take it away, guys.
Thank you, Dwight. And Mark, welcome back from places unknown. We missed you. Becky, thank you for joining us as we continue our coverage of Women's History Month and specifically the great Republican women. We're looking forward to talking about your favorite Republican women, both from the past and the present. And I also want to get into the role that women are playing in today's elections, since I think the biggest conversation my dad and I have and what he says to me is elections are won by suburban white women in like 4 battleground states. So I'm looking forward to getting into that. So let's start with a little bit about your background and what makes you one of our very notable Republican women, and a little bit of what your background is and what you've done, as Dwight kind of mentioned a little bit of your resume.
Well, first of all, let me just say how delighted I am to be with you guys again. It's always great to talk to Marylanders from the Virginia side of the Chesapeake Bay. I've been so blessed with a great career. I wanted to be involved in politics once I got out of college. I was involved in Young Republicans when I was in college. And I just decided in those days that I was a Republican. I read the principles of the Republican Party, and I'm one for principles. So when I read them, I said, "Hey, I think I'm a Republican." And I've had the good privilege of working in campaigns, some with people from Maryland, Don Devine, who I'm sure everybody knows. So I've worked with him, and then I was able to be involved with the American Conservative early in my career, American Conservative Union, and we started the Conservative Political Action Conference. So, from those days, many years ago, how many great Republicans we had participating in CPAC. Speakers included, of course, Ronald Reagan, and we touted him as our favorite Republican for years, starting in 1974. And then during the Reagan administration, I helped on the campaign and then went to work in the White House. So I had 8 great years with President Reagan. And then when I left the federal government and took some time off, we elected George Allen governor of Virginia. And what a great governor he was. I viewed him as kind of a young Ronald Reagan. And he asked me to serve as his Secretary of Natural Resources. So I spent 4 years in the Allen administration and state government here in the Commonwealth. And that was just a wonderful time. We had record economic growth and improved the environment. And that was unique for Republicans and environmental secretaries who believe in freedom. And then I went to work after that for the Heritage Foundation as a vice president, and spent about 25 years there. And I've been involved with lots of organizations that encourage women and promote women and train women. And I've worked to encourage women candidates and women who have gone into other professions, journalists and doctors. And I'm a huge advocate for conservative, principled women. And as you guys know, most of us then are Republicans.
So tell me the advice you give to potential candidates or women who become candidates. How is it different than the advice you give to men?
Well, I will say that there aren't a lot of differences. The first and most important thing, I think, for all candidates, but particularly women candidates, because they can get treated pretty rough by liberal journalists, is know what you believe and why you believe it. Just don't rely on emotion. Don't rely on off the cuff thinking. Get it right before you get in the arena. And on all the issues, just know what you believe, why you believe it, and come up with some responses that connect with your friends and the people you know and work around and live around, so that you're able to communicate with the electorate of our country. And then, of course, I tell women to develop somewhat of a tough skin. Listen, the left throws everything at you but the kitchen sink, and sometimes they try to do that as well. And we have to learn to smile and be prepared for that. Don't be surprised by that. You know, one of the great ladies of American conservatism and Republican politics is Phyllis Schlafly. And Phyllis was such a wonderful warrior. And I tell you, she was one of the first who really got attacked, incredibly attacked by the left, because they don't like conservatives, and they sure don't like conservative women. And Phyllis just knew you just have to have a smile on your face and respond calmly and speak through the reporter who's attacking you directly to the audience that you want to communicate with.
Absolutely. And one of those things, I think one of those issues that you see is so key, particularly for female politicians and female conservatives, is that of abortion and abortion rights. And now also the women and men in sports movement that's been happening with the left as well, is women having to defend the right to be women and to not, like the feminist movement has gone so far to the left that it's now anti-female.
Listen, when I was young, the big fight was to support women's sports, support women in the workplace, support women, support the rights of girls. And, we made so many advances in allowing women to have many opportunities that had not been open to them before. And here now you have the progressives. I hate to use that word, but it means leftists, statists, elitists. They now are undoing all of the advances that we have made in the last 50 or 60 years. And, the ultimate basic right for women is the right to be born, the right to life. And, maybe they don't teach biology these days in public schools the way they taught it when I was going through school. But, when I was going through school, you learned that babies are in the womb. We called them babies then, unborn children, the youngest member of the human family. And so it really is tragic the way the left, the statists, the elitists have just turned on these very fundamental rights that all women are entitled to and we should have in our country.
So I guess one of the challenges is to develop the sort of language, the vocabulary to push back on that. I think you talked about it. The left have co-opted the progressive label, which is unfortunate. And one of the challenges is really to kind of to appeal to traditional, quote, liberal women who were part of the battles that you just referenced, and to communicate the fact that they really are losing ground, because that seems to be lost on a lot of people who are more focused on the debates of the moment, where they have lost the perspective of the sort of long term that you've referenced.
Yes, you are exactly right. It seems like the goal of the left is to put people into pockets and then say, now, if you try to get out of that pocket, we're going to slap you down. And we've seen that repeatedly. I mean, Martina Navratilova, one of the great tennis players, she went out and talked about the rights of women to compete with women only. And boom, they just attacked her. It is really sad that they don't want to encourage women to think for themselves and to recognize the value, the wonderful value of being a woman in today's world. And they're just trying to deny our opportunities, and particularly the young women coming up today. It's a real tragedy. I will say that this young woman, Riley Gaines, now she's being attacked on many fronts, but she has become a wonderful spokeswoman for the rights of women athletes, in particular, to be women and to compete against women. My sister says, if you want to be a woman, if you're a man and you want to be a woman, you really need to make sure that you're not carrying around all the baggage that men have.
So, one of the things that we've seen a rise of in the past several years, several election cycles, and I would say it really kind of started right around COVID and then really hit an uproar with Glenn Youngkin's election, is this mama bear, moms for liberty movement, and seeing, suburban mothers really take a stand and become a really impactful voting bloc. And I think we're going to see that in subsequent elections. I know right now a lot of the rhetoric is around the shifting of young voters, Black voters, and Latino voters,
Yes.
but there's still
Yes.
this powerful voting bloc of women. So how do you see that evolution and that power of the female vote moving forward, especially as we're going into another rematch between Biden and Trump?
Yes, well, I think it is very important that we always keep in mind that we need to encourage women to think for themselves and not be dictated to by some power that be or some blog that they happen to be paying attention to. Think through these issues and think about the ideas of liberty and what has allowed them to determine what they want to be in life. What do they want to have a career? And should they be able to have a career? Do they want to be a stay-at-home mom? Should they be able to make that choice without feeling guilty? So I think we really need to speak to women in suburbia and frankly in the inner city and say, we have fought for many years to make sure your voice can be heard, that you have the opportunity and the right to get a good education, to train your mind to think. And we want you to be thoughtful about these ideas that are being debated. And also think about the future for your children, your nieces, your grandchildren. Don't lock them into an unfortunate future just because of the political winds of today and the mainstream media's badgering of women to all think alike.
Well, you put your finger on kind of one of the key dynamics now is this notion that people should should reflect their identity in their politics, and that any diversions from that is somehow a scandal, really, even something to really push back in a major degree. I mean, that fundamentally is a kind of Marxist notion, isn't it? That that individuals
group think. Yes, group think, put people in groups, treat them not as individuals. Conservative Republican principles are each individual is important, each individual is unique and precious. And the left, the progressive, the statist, the elitist, they want to put people in groups and have them just identify as a group and not think for themselves.
So unfortunately, our first female vice president is Kamala Harris. Definitely not the shining example of what we would want a first female vice president to be. What kind of, if any, what kind of damage do you think that's done to, I guess, people wrapping their mind around the idea of, okay, we're ready for a female president? And I know that this election cycle was, something else, right? And there's a lot that went into it other than just your average presidential cycle. But do you think that her being such a weak showing as a vice president has kind of made people second guess having a female president or vice president? I hope not, but do you think that might have been happening to people?
I honestly don't think so. I think people realize, the thinking people in America realize why she was selected to be on the ticket. And anyone who's been involved in the political arena at all probably has done a little research on her history and realizes she didn't exactly get where she is because she's the brightest bulb in the lamp. So I think, and frankly, we on the Republican side have some outstanding women leaders. And I think that we're going to be able to demonstrate as the days and weeks and months go by here that we have women who can actually be effective vice presidents who are qualified and prepared to be president should that situation ever present itself. So I think that she's done a lot of damage, frankly, in her own party and in the independent mind for that party. But I don't think she's overall done damage for women. I hope that's the case.
We've seen that in many competitive races, there's really a desire to recruit women for races, and that when parties are in a position to do that. Do you think now that for many candidates in these cliffhanger races, that there is an advantage for selecting a woman as a candidate over a man, all things being equal?
I think that's only the case if you have a woman who is absolutely solid on principle and courageous. You've got to be courageous to be in this business and be, worth your salt, and who actually likes people. One of the challenges that you have when you're a candidate, if you get recruited and you don't really feel the desire to want to serve the people. I mean, actually, we're electing public servants, and but I do think that women, women can be very, very tough. I mean, I know a lot of very strong women, principled women. They're great warriors, and I don't think that there should be any kind of an automatic response. Oh, we'll go to some successful businessman. I think we should be encouraging women to be involved in politics, school boards, city councils, county commissions, all the way up to Congress, the Senate, and then, of course, a vice president and president. I mean, Maryland actually has had two leaders in Marjorie Holt. I mean, that she was one of the first Republican women in Congress. She was tough, but she definitely was a servant of her constituents. She was very, very good. And then, of course, Ellen Sauerbrey, who just came on the scene and just, did a fabulous job, ran a great campaign, almost won that race. And then when they realized how close to winning she came, they turned out that big vote in Democrat precincts the next time. But both of those women were leaders. They led the way. They're great role models for women across the country. And I think they did a lot to show you can be pleasant, and you can be friendly, and you can be caring, and you can be principled and courageous at the same time.
So what is one Republican woman who you think so many people, they don't know her name, but they should, and they should do our homework?
Well, I'll tell you, my short list for vice president includes one of those. And her name is Brooke Rollins. She currently is the president of the America First Policy Institute. But Brooke Rollins was the president of the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And she joined the Trump administration in the early part. But she was a leader in her university. She is a lawyer. She's a mom. She has wonderful kids and a great husband. I believe that Brooke Rollins would be prepared to be president. She has the talent, the brains, the compassion, and the courage to do that. And people don't know her name because she's sort of been behind the scenes and she hasn't run for public office. But you can be a leader by starting and running a think tank, and then starting and running a second think tank. And so I think she's someone that people ought to get to know.
I'll have to do my homework on her. I don't know. Not
Absolutely. Well, let me shift gears a little bit, because we've referenced a little of how things have changed over time. And there's a lot of discussion, as you know, about the quote Trump impact on the Republican Party and how the Trump voter has shifted But then I also think of the Reagan era, and particularly the quote unquote Reagan Democrats. We'll remember that, people who were traditionally Democrats, but were pulled in for the conservative. Tell me, are there more differences or more similarities between the coalition that Trump has attracted and the one that Ronald Reagan created?
Well, I think there are more similarities than differences, but some of the differences are important. And I hope that President Trump, thinks through how to deal with them. I think Ronald Reagan was a champion of the working man and woman in America. He believed you should be able to have a job if you wanted a job. He wanted to grow the private sector, not the government. And he wanted every American who was working to be able to keep more of what they earned. He believed that individuals were better able to decide how to spend their money than sending it off to a big bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump has that same view. He has long been a supporter for those in America who want to work for a living. He wanted to grow the economy and did so. So I think that he's put together much of the same coalition that President Reagan had. Now, when President Reagan got the nomination, he had to reach out to the establishment wing of the Republican Party in order to assure that they didn't stay at home, because he wasn't part of the establishment. If you recall, he was definitely not, and he was attacked by the media relentlessly, called a cowboy. So he did reach out to the establishment, and he was able to bring the establishment, for the most part. I can still name a few members of the establishment who didn't come along, but most of the establishment did support the Reagan-Bush ticket. And so we put together that winning coalition, which was an early election call against Jimmy Carter. And then that coalition grew into 1984, where we won every state but Minnesota. I think the only reason we didn't win Minnesota was because the president didn't want to beat down the senator from Minnesota who was his opponent in that election. I think we maybe could have carried Minnesota as well. But the coalition then included all of the people who wanted to work. We got a significant, for a Republican candidate, percentage of the black vote. Now, George Allen, I might say, got 17% in Virginia. We didn't get that with the Reagan presidency, but we worked hard to reach out to that community where they shared the president's values. Of course, the Hispanic population was much smaller then, but we got a good deal of the Cuban American vote because they understood the values of liberty. And now we see that President Trump is putting together this coalition in greater numbers. I mean, he definitely was a president who allowed and encouraged and had an economy that grew for the black community, both in terms of opportunity and also in terms of pay. And then, of course, the Hispanic community, I think, which has grown large, very large in the U.S. Many of the Hispanics share Republican values. Many of them are small business people. Many of them are very, very hard workers. And they also benefited from the Trump economy and the president's willingness to reach out to them and encourage them to become part of the coalition. President Trump's biggest challenge, I think, now is with some of the establishment elitists who still call themselves Republicans. And I think that what it will come down to in the fall is the president's willingness to try and reach out to them, not compromising his principles, nothing like that, but to reach out to them to try to bring them back into the fold. And then they're going to have to decide. Do they want a president who's pro-freedom, who's pro-free enterprise, who wants to make America great again? Or do they want a continuation of this effort by the current team that's in the White House, whether it's Biden and Harris or whoever, of more regulation, more taxes, a less focus on growing the private sector and a situation that's not really good for any American who loves liberty and wants to work for a living.
So what is your prediction of the outcome of the 2024 election? Not just presidential, but Senate, House, what's flipping, what's staying, are majorities expanding? What are your predictions?
Well, it's very hard to make a prediction, and I'll tell you why. Illegal immigrants will be permitted to vote for president and possibly for Senate and Congress in a number of states. Who would have ever thought this? I mean, you used to think you needed to be a citizen of the United States of America to be able to vote in our federal elections, but that has changed. And so one of the reasons why I think you see the open border policy by this administration is they're viewing this as bringing in people who will be able to vote for them. And you watch the interviews down at the border, they all know the name Biden.
They have shirts.
So I think that is very problematic. And I think we need to focus on election integrity, not just in our own areas. Like I'm in Southwest Virginia, where we have 80% good people voting for good Republicans and 20% good people who just have it wrong on the ballot. But we've got to be working very hard to, right now, we have to be working very hard right now to make sure that we have election integrity, because as you know, election day is no longer election day. It's like election 2 months. And so we have to be very, very, very focused on election integrity. If we are not, they will very easily just sweep us away. But I think there are a lot of people now, both Republicans and independents, who are very concerned about election integrity. And I think we'll have more focus on that. I think we have a lot of very good candidates running for the Senate and for the House. I don't know who President Trump's going to pick as his vice president, but if he picks someone like Ben Carson or Brooke Rollins, then I think he will have a winning ticket. And then it will be up to us in each of our respective states to make sure that only American citizens are voting and that the votes are properly counted. And then we win.
What's discouraging about that, I have to say, is that a lot of the effort on voter integrity is really on the lists, on the voter rolls, and how those are maintained. That takes place well before the election, because once somebody's on the list, yes, that's yes, not that. And that secondly, a lot of the, how shall I say, controls or safeguards that existed where people were on the rolls that shouldn't have been could be addressed, at least when people had to show up at the polls. So in my building, I've found somebody who's been dead for 20 years still on the rolls. Yes. Under the old rules, for them to have voted because they're enacted, they would have had to show up, and that would have been a problem. There would have been a miracle. But today, with mail-in ballots, if somebody gets a hold of that person's ballot, there's really no yes, control. And that's really one of the challenges that we face is that it's the ability to influence voter integrity during the election is that much harder to accomplish.
Well, I think you're exactly right. And in fact, I know some very good Republicans who say, well, I vote on election day. And I say to them, well, listen, if you don't make every effort to vote early, right, you may find that when you go to the polls on election day, you've already voted. Mm-hmm. And they really don't understand that particular point. So we have to keep in mind that Republicans have to use the rules that are in place. We can't use the rules like we would like them to be. Right. We'd love to have an election day where everybody, as a patriot, went out and voted or chose not to vote. But the rules are as they are, and we have to encourage every Republican to begin to vote as quickly as they can. Go to the clerk of court's offices, vote the first day you can vote, and get everybody else to do the same thing. so that we have more votes cast by real live individual citizens before the election. And I think if we can convince Republicans to do this, we will have a higher degree of integrity at the polls, because they do have to go into an office to vote. The mail-in votes, listen, we have to watch out for a national catastrophe that will encourage mail-in votes, because the mail-in ballots are fraught with danger, as you've indicated. And actually, even Jimmy Carter was on a presidential election commission that recommended against using mail-in ballots because of the prevalence of fraud.
So every single poll, I think, consistently has shown that the number one issue for voters this cycle is the border. Do you think that that's going to be the case in general and people will show up to the polls, or do you think they're still going to vote based off of January 6th abortion and the things that have kind of carried them through the last two cycles?
I think that the abortion issue is one that the Democrats will hammer on, and that will definitely drive some people to the polls who really don't understand the political process and the legal process. But nevertheless, it will drive some to the polls. I think the January 6th issue will be increasing. It will be increasingly become clear that the president was concerned enough about the situation at the Capitol that he offered to the Speaker of the House, who, by the way, was Nancy Pelosi, National Guard troops well in advance of the rallies that day. I think it will become increasingly clear that there were people inside the, let's say, the investigative arms of government who were participating in that January 6th rally. And so I think I say that it will diminish the emotional nature of what we heard day after day after day after day, much of which was just untrue. I do think that the border issue is huge. You hear it so often now, every state is a border state. I mean, this is true. This is absolutely true. And, you can't have a nation unless you have borders. And the American citizens, I think, understand this. And they also recognize that while the consensus is that people who are illegals can't work, that this is just not the case. First of all, there's ability to get fraudulent documentation. It's very easy now, and there's no system in place for identifying illegals who want to vote. Want to work. There's no way to identify them and say, well, you're in this group or not. I think we should be looking at something like that. But I do think the border issue will be probably the number one issue. And then you're just going to have party loyalty. And we have to keep in mind the Democrats have been very, very, very good at demanding party loyalty all the way down to the local citizen. And they have a lot of money, and they will turn these people out to vote, whether it's going to the clerk of court's office and voting in person before election day, or doing this mail-in ballot business where they will go and collect these ballots. We know they will do it. Listen, it's a huge issue. We can win, I think, but we can't take anything for granted. And we have to have candidates that know what they believe and why they believe it and can explain it to people in a dispassionate but courageous way.
We've seen, you've referenced the fact that you've moved within Virginia to a more rural part of Virginia.
Yes.
I believe you used to live in, was it Arlington, Alexandria?
Yes.
But
Arlington, yes.
Within the People's Republic then of Arlington, as it's finally known in Virginia. We've seen more of this phenomena where people have sort of moved into sort of resorted themselves, if you will, politically to the same region. What's it been like to move to an area that is that much redder than where you were before?
Well, it's interesting. I think wherever you live, you develop friendships and spheres of influence and communities of your own. And in Arlington, we were active with the Arlington Republicans. We were involved with a local church. We had our neighborhood community that we were involved with. We knew in Arlington that the Republicans our goal was 27% of the vote because we knew what minority we were in. Now, coming down here to Southwest Virginia, we've met a lot of very wonderful people. Some of them are hard-nosed Democrats, and they're just going to vote Democratic no matter who's on the ballot. And on the other hand, we found many, many people who share our values, and whether or not they're active with the Republican Party, they actually take the time to learn what the candidates are saying, and therefore we saw many more people vote for the Republican candidates in the last several elections since we've been down here, at least. And it's kind of fun to be in an 80% Republican county instead of a 27% Democrat Republican county.
So as we get towards the end of the show, is there anything else that you wanted to plug or talk about before we start to close out?
Listen, I just want to say, as we've talked about a lot of women, we have some really outstanding women leaders today. You could think of, we've got 4 governors who've done tax cutting in their states. Sarah Sanders Huckabee is the most recent one. Huckabee Sanders, sorry. But Kristi Noem and Kay Ivey in Alabama and Kim Reynolds in Iowa, they've all been leaders on cutting taxes and letting the people keep more of what they earn, education choice. I mean, these are the kinds of leaders that we need to champion. Katie Britt did a very good job the other night in her response. She's the senator from Alabama now. She's solid. She's going to be there for a long time. She's a mom and a lawyer and just a smart lady. But then we talk about, historic people too. And I would be remiss if I didn't remind everyone that the brightest star in the Republican constellation for women was Sarah Palin a few years ago. She got a lot of women involved. She got everybody excited. I think McCain was losing until he announced her to be his vice president. And then all of a sudden he went up in the polls and unfortunately went back down. But we've had some really terrific people. I think of Carrie Lake out in Arizona. She ran a very tough race. She's running again for the Senate. Very well-spoken woman, courageous. In other words, we have a lot of really great women. And then we have great organizations. Women need to get involved. They need to get involved. If they're interested in politics, they need to get involved with the Claire Booth Luce Policy Institute or Independent Women's Forum. If they like to shoot, they need to get involved with the local NRA women's organization. If they're pro-life, they want to be involved with the Susan B. Anthony list. In other words, get involved with people who share your views and figure out how you can be an important cog in that wheel. And then, of course, we've got the National Federation of Republican Women. There's always opportunities. If you're not inclined to be involved in politics and policy, then you need to get involved in things like the Rotary Club if you're in small business, the school board if you have children who go to public schools. So I really encourage women to get involved. We've had so many great leaders in the past. We've got great leaders now. You can be a great leader, but you got to be out there, putting yourself out there and be courageous about it.
Awesome.
Very well said.
Absolutely. So there are a couple things going on around the state that we need to plug. I know coming up for us tomorrow is our Pi Day event at Mama Lucia's Olney at 6:30. We have Jessica Hare as our speaker, continuing on with the theme of very strong conservative women. She is a lawyer and an architect and probably one of the smartest women that I've met in Maryland. So definitely come out and listen to her.
And Jackie, we should probably emphasize that this is a special edition of
Special edition, yes.
special edition, because normally we do first Pizza Politics for the first Thursday, but because of Pi Day, and we're using it in the STEM context as opposed to the culinary context, so I guess we're adopting a little of that. But that's why we're having one tomorrow, and we're looking forward to having Jessica.
Yes.
Sorry.
And then next Tuesday, the 19th, the Anne Arundel County Republican Central Committee is having Lee Zeldin for their Lincoln Day dinner, one of my favorite former members of Congress. So definitely go out to hear him. I think those are the big ones. I know that there's the Bob Ehrlich book signing event, right? When is that? April
4th.
April 4th. I was going to say I didn't have it in front of me. April 4th. And of course, we have Dave Bossie coming to the Montgomery County Republican Club for another.
Oh, great. You guys have a lot going on.
Very busy.
Another piece of politics.
That's great. And the other thing to keep in mind is there's a new co-chairman at the RNC who's a woman.
Yes.
Laura Trump. And I think they'll make a good team there. But she's someone that I'm sure would love to come to Maryland as well.
Absolutely. We'll have to look into that one. And and then Mark, I get to actually see you in person this weekend.
Because
we're going to
Masoni's. Masoni's in Nottingham, Maryland. This is for the executive committee of the state Republican Party. But you don't need to be part of that to go and have a great dinner there. Right, Jackie?
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. I've been on a real Italian kick lately. All right. Thank you all so much for watching. We will be back next week with another guest, and have a great evening.
Thanks.
Thanks so much. God bless.
Yeah, that was weird. Bye.